Welcome to the Strategy and Leadership Podcast, the podcast that brings you practical advice, lessons, and stories from senior leaders and thought leaders from around the world. The Strategy and Leadership Podcast is brought to you by SME Strategy, working with organizations around the world to create and implement their strategic plans. To learn more, visit SMEstrategy.net. And now, your host, Anthony Taylor.
Hey there, folks. Welcome to today's episode of the Strategy and Leadership Podcast. My guest today is Kristina Fusella, who is the Senior Director, Capabilities and Employee Experience at Novo Nordisk. I think I got all of that. Kristina, how's it going today?
Yeah, spot on, Anthony. I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Excellent. I'm awesome now talking to you today. I wasn't doing awesome yesterday, but I'm really excited to chat. I'm excited to hear about your experience. I'm excited to hear about just your non-traditional career path and then the work that you're doing. So why don't you give our listeners a little bit more about you and how you got here, and we'll get into it.
Sounds good. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here and talking to this audience. So as Anthony said, my current title is the Senior Director of Capabilities and Employee Experience. Excuse me, I'm hesitating a little bit because I'm not used to saying that. I'm actually on a 1-year rotation that started January 1st into this role. It's a pretty bold move because I have absolutely no background in capabilities or anything related to this job function. So it's part of my wish to build a wide breadth of experiences and really push myself to take some bold moves in my career to gain, exponential learning out of it. I'm an analytics person by background. I'm actually an engineer by training. I graduated with a degree in engineering. Started my career in consulting at IBM, very broad, and narrowed into the pharmaceutical industry, and found Novo Nordisk because I simply love the culture and I love the mission and purpose of this company because, it sounds a little bit unrealistic, but I will say when we were actually recently named top best places to work internationally worldwide, I really do feel that as an employee and N1. It's a great culture. So I joined Novo about 8 years ago in an analytics role and had the pleasure of moving into different types of roles since then. Actually was able to take a leap in my career, the first one from an analytics role into a sales function to broaden my experiences in the commercial space. And that was pretty crazy, going from someone who sits behind the computer typically all day into someone who's out in the field talking to people all day and trying to sell product and answer questions and be the face of the organization for those people. And that gave me the confidence to try a little bit, other things, to take bigger leaps of faith. So from there, I was able to jump into a purely commercial role in a department called Market Access, did payer and employer marketing. And then from there, I was actually most recently the chief of staff to our head of strategy and rare disease. So really focusing on future business strategy, where this organization is heading in the next 5, 10, 20 years and charting that future. So really cool times. And then all along the way, I'm a huge advocate of employee resource groups. I co-led the Millennials ERG is what we call them, way back in 2018 to 19, and learned a lot from that experience. And currently, I am the co-lead of Women in Novo Nordisk, which is our largest employee resource group of over 2,000 members in the U.S. So that's a little bit about me, my windy career path, my jungle gym, as I call it, and I'm still figuring it out.
Sweet. Well, it sounds like, just talking about Novo a little bit in terms of like the culture of the organization to be supportive, to make that happen. It's not, what I see is either you switch companies to make a move in your career, and that's hard enough. And it sounds like this culture is supportive of having the right people in the right roles and sees like breadth as a strength. Is that fair to say?
That is fair to say, and it wasn't always like that. And that's actually part of the reason why I love this company so much now is when I first started here at Novo, I spent the first 4 years in one role, in the analytics role, and I felt quite a bit pigeonholed into that career path. even though for a while I have been trying to express my interest in a different job in a totally different function. And we didn't really have any mechanisms to allow employees to do that. We had pretty strict job descriptions. So, for example, if you wanted to move into a marketing role, for example, you needed like 5 to 6 years of experience in marketing specifically. Otherwise, your resume wouldn't even be considered. And that was certainly my experience earlier on. But through the employee resource groups and by being such a listening company, I would say, a lot of that feedback came, was elevated from employees. And my situation was an N of one, but there was others that felt a similar sort of situation where your transferable skills weren't being recognized to be able to move into different roles. And that was also kind of limiting some of the potential of our employees in general. And in the last 4 years, the company has really opened up and more recently very aggressively on allowing for these very bold job swaps, for example, the one that I'm currently in now. And that all came out of employee feedback. And it was a journey to get here, but it was super cool to see it come into fruition.
That's awesome. So I'd love to hear more about employee resource groups and like what they mean at Novo, and to kind of put a bit of context in that, and when we talk to CEOs and business leaders, and a lot of them have never done this before, they might have been CEO of their company, their presidents, and even if they have an HR director, people director, or heck, for really any function, they're as good as the experience they have, and they're as good as the experience that they can access. And so what I think is neat about ERGs, and the little I know of them, it's an opportunity to tap into greater experience, a greater depth of knowledge without being I don't want to use the word cumbersome, but I also don't want to use the word like formulaic. It's not like, hey, let's like do a pulse survey and let's like see what people want. It's like a lot more quality, while also allowing employees to step into it. But that's my view on it. How would you describe ERGs? And maybe you can give us a little bit of insight into how they're run and what your experience has been with them.
Yeah, and I like what you said about getting to quality, because it's essentially getting closer to the people and really listening to them. And the beauty about ERG is I think you could be any size of a company to do it very well. So I'll tell you a little bit about my experience at Novo. I think in a lot of companies I've been in previously, there's always these kind of special interest groups, whether they're employee formed or they're more formally company sponsored. You'll have groups of people gather around together just by nature of having an interest together. So at Novo Nordisk, we have many different groups, and the ones that have experience are our Millennials organization, which has actually since been rebranded to Emerge, to more focus on emerging talent rather than a certain generation of talent. The Asian Pacific Islander specific ERG, coming from Chinese descent myself, and then Women in Novo Nordisk, which is the one I co-lead. And so these are groups that I think can easily be mistakenly seen as social clubs. And it's a bunch of people kind of networking. And especially what I found with the Asian Pacific Islander group, you gather around more celebrations based off of the culture. And I think those are really fun celebrations, but they're also really important because you're spreading cultural awareness. And in the world of promoting diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging, those are also very critical as well. The work that I more strategically would encourage people to think about with ERGs is how you could tap into this employee population as a resource. So that can happen in a couple of different ways. One way is, to me, this is a perfect breeding ground for talent. When you have a structure like an ERG, that means someone has taken on the lead, or some group of people has taken on the lead to make it run and make it happen. So you're talking about leadership without maybe formal authority. Maybe you have a leader who has, because everybody has a day job, this is someone who is inspiring and motivating people to dedicate time outside of their day job responsibilities to take on some work or take on an initiative. So all of these skill sets, a breeding ground for people who have future potential at this company. And to me, it's a really safe sandbox for them to test and learn and fail a couple of times and totally not harm anything in terms of company revenue or anything extremely important to the running of an organization. So, for example, my first co-lead of an ERG, I would say it was with the millennials group, and I had to experience how to give feedback to people, how to coach people. There are some that totally drop the ball, and how do you get them to either performance management or convince them to keep on going? So those are things I had to deal with, which I absolutely 100% tell you that I did not do very well. But that was my first time, leading a group of people. And, I was very happy reflecting on my experience. I did it in a safe space like an ERG. Didn't ruin anybody's career, didn't hurt anything in the company, but was able to actually practice those. So when the stakes are higher, I wouldn't make the same mistakes.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that comes out loud and clear is, you're allowing somebody it's like a training ground. I mean, that's learning and development, like training, so you can get better. And as you practice in a lower stakes arena, it's an opportunity to, whether it's the emerging leaders or another subgroup, an opportunity to build that experience like within the organization. I did have a question, because you said like outside of the day job. Does that mean that it is beyond your 9 to 5, or is it like akin to maybe not a secondment, but some of your working hours are able to be dedicated to the ERG?
Yeah, so my recommendation to everyone, and I say this to anyone who joins the core team of an ERG that I lead, is for it to be successful, it should be done during working hours. Development should always be done during the working hours. This is not about asking someone to burn the midnight oil for, an effort that may or may not be rewarded at the end of the year. When we think about people development at Novo Nordisk, we have this 70-20-10 rule, where 70% of your learning and development happens kind of on the job, experiential, what you're learning day to day. 20% of it should be doing something else, either, cross mentoring, coaching, or learning from other people, being in a different group like an ERG, and you're being around different people across the organization and being exposed to different things. And then 10% is more maybe formal classroom learning or taking courses online. So I really ascribe to that when I lead my team. 70% of the rule, you have things to deliver on your day job, and you're learning kind of on the fly, but really encouraging people to carve out that time to make space for their own development. And that's inclusive of taking on a leadership role or just leading initiatives within an ERG.
And one of the things that come up with SMEs, at least, and I mean in all businesses, is like, our employees need to do their day job. They're like so busy, and when are they going to have time to do other stuff? And so like, one, it sounds like it is a commitment of the organization to do that. And then I would imagine it's understood from your peers, and call it your managers, to say, hey, we all share that 70-20-10 expectation, or at least the understanding that, of your working week, 8 hours of it is going to be spent doing ERG or other activities that'll support your own development and ultimately make you better and more effective in that other 28 hours. Is that reasonable?
Yep, absolutely. And I think getting that support from your leadership is really critical. And then the other thing I would say is that this is not only beneficial for the employee or people who are looking for self-development too. The ERGs can be really critical for employee engagement, and being able to, like I said, change things in an organization. So my secondary experience with ERGs is almost, this is a group that represents a diverse population, and you have a responsibility to represent the voices of that population. So for the ERGs, for example, in Women in Novo Nordisk, one thing that we are running is an insights work. And it's kind of like a market research or a really deep research into understanding the person's voice and their perspectives of our group. And we were essentially hearing, I think women have a very strong career track in this organization. I don't think there's any real glass ceilings that I could, perceive, but there are some things that are holding women back. And what are those things that are preventing people from maximizing their potential at work? So this is a study that I had commissioned to really deeply understood from our membership, all anonymous. What are those things that we need to change within our culture or within ourselves, or what can we as an ERG do to help, and what can the organization do to help change so that we remove barriers for this demographic at work? And that was really powerful for our executive team to see and understand, because when you have certain decisions that you're making around the table, you may not have all the diverse perspectives. And it allows to this company to have a better environment for people. So to me, it's a win-win for all different parties to really promote these ERGs. Certainly for the individuals who can get a lot of personal development out of it, but also for the executives who are planning, their future workforce. How do you make this company a place that people want to stay at for years?
And that was what I was going to ask you next about the, women in Novo ERG, because, with 2,000 people in it, not everybody is leading it, and looking at the participation and, kind of, you have like the mental heuristic of like, this is not a committee, when there's committees designed to get together and potentially solve or work on a problem, whereas this is more of like a population and a way of including folks, understanding their needs. So I guess what would be the difference between somebody who participates in an ERG and somebody leading it? And then I do want to ask you about the rest of your career experience and how you've managed to navigate that. But what's the difference between somebody participating and leading an ERG?
Sure, and I think leadership comes at all levels in an ERG. It's not just the co-leads at the very top leading the whole thing. I think everyone has their own role to play, and ERGs can offer leadership experience if people want it for anyone really. We're happy to take volunteers. Anyone who raises their hand, certainly. So the difference between a participant, anyone can be a member of any ERG. You don't have to fall within that demographic. We actually have men on our core team to serve as male allies and really activate the allyship component of it. As a participant, it's all about what value you can extract from an ERG. It's things like networking, exposure to mentors from, senior leaders in the organization from other areas. There's a lot that we do in terms of training and programming that our team pushes out. So there's a lot of value that you could receive. I think what people find really most valuable is the community and the networking piece of it. And then as a lead, I think at any level, whether it's leading a local initiative or leading a larger team, or for me, it's actually leading leaders. So my immediate core team, they each lead subcommittees of anywhere from 10 to 70 people. So it's, you can get experience doing different lines of leadership at any level. But cool. I think in a smaller company, I will say when, for example, I led the Millennials ERG, that was a first line leader, my first time managing people. And I think that was highly valuable in its own way, too.
Yeah. Well, I think what's cool about that, and I hadn't necessarily put it together, that, the groups, there can be layers to it, and that it isn't necessarily representative solely of that group, but again, to get a understanding of the population, the needs, the challenges, but then also to create an awareness and a connection between that sub ERG. Mm-hmm. So we'll switch gears a little bit as we finish up, and, in the time that we've gotten to know each other in the past 20 minutes or so, you're obviously somebody who is keen to take on the next challenge and jump 2 feet in. And, through your career track, you've just done different things that you might not have necessarily done before. What were some of the kind of what was your attitude going into it? And I ask specifically because we have young leaders on our podcast, emerging leaders, dare we say, that may want to try something new, but they might wonder, hey, A, am I good enough? B, I've never done this before. C, what if I fail? What are some of the things that you talked yourself through to give you the confidence to take that next leap, whether it's in your career or personal life or what have you?
Absolutely. It's a great question. And personal development, as you can tell, is a really critical, part of me. I have always had the attitude of having a wide breadth of experience. For me, I think the future leaders of the world or any company, as the world gets increasingly complex, will need a broad toolbox to be able to pull from to deal with any challenges that come through their way. It was actually very apparent to me in my last role serving as chief of staff to one of our very senior executives. And I think that's one of the only roles where you can get an appreciation for just how heavy a responsibility of someone who's at the executive level is, and the types of decisions she had to make, and the sheer amount of responsibility that she shouldered. And for me, it was a very clear picture of there is so much that I want in my toolbox to build in the next, 5, 10, 15 years of my career. So I will be fully ready to be a leader, ready to serve and can serve well for my people. So having a wide breadth was always my MO. I've had early mentors in my career that talked about how if you grow and kind of only focus on getting promoted, for example, in a certain vertical, well, at some point you're going to hit a ceiling. And if there's any sort of, God forbid, like layoffs or any sense of companies wanting to downsize, you have a very shaky foundation to stand on. She kind of, made the metaphor of just being a really tall and skinny tree growing vertical. And you want the wider the breadth of experience that you can get gives you a broader base, so that you will be so much more prepared and I think so much more well-rounded that an organization will want to retain you because you could do so many different types of roles. So that was always my thinking. And I do believe that this concept of having experience across multiple areas, it may seem a little disjointed, but for me, my North Star has always been wanting to eventually be a chief commercial officer somewhere in some way, maybe 20 years from now. And that's always in. So as long as an experience aligns to that, it's well worth it. In terms of, self-confidence and doing something like this, I'm not going to lie, it is terrifying to switch into a role where you don't have any base of expertise in. I've done it a couple of times now, and I tell you, it's really scary every single time. But it's just more that I now know what to expect and how to manage that a little bit better. But the first 30 to 60 days, you don't feel so great, especially if you came from a world where you were just, really gelling and, really in the flow of what you're doing. You knew everything. To kind of take that and interrupt it and move into a world where you are now have a beginner's mind again. It's pretty scary, and it's pretty uncomfortable every single time I've done it, I would say. But I find that those are the leaps that give me the most exponential growth, and have always, if for the next, I know for the next couple of months I'm going to be very uncomfortable in this role, but coming out of it, it's going to allow me to go even higher and go even farther than I would have had I just stayed in one spot and grown there. So if that helps, that's how I like to think about it.
Oh, I love it. I mean, an arrow has to go backwards before it goes further. And so looking
that's
at that.
That's a great metaphor.
And then I think one of the things that just really stands out is there are certain activities in life, and I'm not saying this is how you say it, but certain activities suck when you do them at first. and then they get better and better. And even if they've been challenging for you, Kristina, that like coming out of them, like you said, you've been better for it. If it took you 20 years to get to CCO or Chief Commercial Officer, I would be very surprised, as in I believe it would go much faster than that, just given your propensity to take on new challenges and the impact that you're having in the organization. And one of the things that is maybe understated in terms of the work that you've done and that you're doing is, if you think that like tall, skinny branch versus deep roots, the work in ERGs, the work across functions, the work with different leaders, the work with different mentors that can, like, you get to contribute to and they get to contribute to you. It will only, like you said, exponentially increase your growth, and the network aspect of the organization and any all work shouldn't be minimized. And I say that to you, the listener, is in, sometimes it takes time, but it's worth it. I recently had someone who is a president of one of the big cruise lines. She was 40 years in the cruise line, started off in sales, and then had the non-traditional career path. So it's just interesting. Yeah. So that's why I'm like, oh, well, she did it. You can do it. And curious to see how that goes. So that's amazing. Kristina, how can people get a hold of you? How can people connect with you? How can they learn more about the work that's being done at Novo, and just to follow your career path to Chief Commercial Officer and or beyond?
Well, thank you. I appreciate the vote of confidence. Certainly, we'll see how it goes, but people can absolutely find me on LinkedIn. I'm not I don't have any, fancy website or anything, but, just my LinkedIn profile. Feel free to send me a message. I'm very open. I love connecting with people. So I hope to hear from some of you.
Awesome. Folks, my guest today has been Kristina Fusella, who is the Senior Director, Capabilities and Employee Experience, brand new in her role, and surely is going to kick lots of butts and contribute to folks in the organization. So, Kristina, thank you so much for being here with me. It's been a blast, and really, I wish you nothing but the best in your career, and I look forward to following along with whatever you get up to.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Anthony. This has been an absolute pleasure for me. Thank you so much for having me on, and thank you to all of you for listening. I appreciate it.
Likewise. The pleasure's mine. Folks, just one of the things that I'm left with today is, the opportunity, if you're a president, a CEO, or even a leader, an opportunity to create ERGs, to, obviously provide leadership opportunities to your team members, to expand their skill sets, their purpose, and the opportunity to do something big within your organization, but ultimately like have that like inclusion, the safety, the like supporting the people within there. And then as you are in your career, whether you're new or old in your career, that there's always opportunities to step into something new. It will likely suck at first, but almost certainly get better. And, big scary things often have great results at the end of it. So I embrace you to take on whatever challenge you have going on this month, this week, this quarter, including potentially even sharing this podcast with one of your friends. So folks, this has been the Strategy and Leadership Podcast. My name is Anthony Taylor. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Thanks for sharing. Thanks for subscribing. And thanks for taking on something big, even if it's scary. Appreciate you. And I'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Strategy and Leadership Podcast. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please consider giving us a review. We appreciate you listening and following along, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. And as Anthony says, until next time.